Ow! Gee, that was a bad idea.
So I saw Us in theaters this week, and I recommend you check it out because it's an interesting thing that Jordan Peele is doing with this new social horror thing he's creating. And obviously it's super well shot, and there's a lot of interesting ideas, and Lupita Nyong'o's performance is absolutely great. And also, like, the mix of tonalities, like the horror and comedy mix, it doesn't actually detract from the horror, and I think it works really well. There are a lot of great ideas. But there's something that bothered me about the film, and I think I would call it thematic incoherence. Like, as I was watching it, I had trouble understanding, like, what was at stake, what were the forces really clashing, and I was constantly asking myself questions that didn't draw me into the narrative, but threw me out of it. Questions like, where are these people coming from? Not in the sense of, oh my gosh, who are these doppelgangers? But in the sense of, like, but wait, who are these doppelgangers? For most of the movie, it was just like a good versus evil type thing. Like, people want to kill people, and other people don't want to get killed by those people. And rather than overcoming psychological challenges and overcoming thematically coherent challenges, they were just overcoming physical challenges. Instead of, I mean, usually they'd be, in a way, overcoming themselves, which in this movie, about doppelgangers, they don't. Ironic, I know. Brian McDonald wrote this really interesting book called Invisible Ink. It's really great. He talks about theme as armature, which is a little bit different, but basically he says it's an armature which the whole story is built around. Basically, every little detail of the story, every most minuscule beat of the script really, at the end, revolves around this theme. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically the gist of it. And it's a really good book, and you should check it out if you ever want to write stories. Anyway, in Us, I didn't see a coherent armature holding the pieces together. I just saw it switching from theme to theme all the time. Like, at first it was a film about family, and then it was a film about self-perception, maybe, and then at the end it finally becomes clear in Act 3 that it's actually about class struggle, a class conflict. And so I have some gripes with that third act, so, like, this is where we get into spoiler territory, so there's your warning. So this movie's concept is totally wacko and crazy, and I love it because it's different, but I have some problems mostly with how it was presented. So it turns out there's this underground tunnel system where every American has a clone, a so-called tethered, who lives a copy of their lives but a shittier version. And this literally lower class of people ends up rising up and forming a rebellion against this upper class of people, which is what the movie revolves around. That's the horror scenario. And now, obviously, this whole underground world is logistically impossible because, like, aside from the fact that they have to, like, get 300 million red jumpsuits and they need to have some sort of, like, plumbing and I think electricity too, but then they say that the project was abandoned years ago. Like, when the little girl on the surface gets that Thriller t-shirt, the girl down below also has the Thriller t-shirt, but then in, like, the next shot we see this guy eating French fries, and the downstairs version of him is eating a raw rabbit. So they have access to branded t-shirts, but not to French fries, which is like, why? And it's funny, and of course we're not meant to question it because it's a metaphor, but it's just one more thing that throws me off of, like, what does all of this mean? My bigger issue is that throughout the whole film, I'm asking myself, where did these people come from? And the origin of the tethered would have to be the most important place to communicate theme or what the conflict is really about. And the way that they do that is just they have the antagonist sort of mention it on the side that I guess some government scientists created them like years ago. And it's important that they're government scientists. I don't actually think she even mentions that literally, but it's important that they're government scientists because there's this whole theme of, like, government manipulating people and that playing into this metaphorical class struggle. But it's just sort of mentioned at this point, and it comes totally out of nowhere, and everything is just sort of not really making sense at this point. So it's not satisfying as an explanation. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of horror movies have this problem, and it's a problem that Get Out didn't have, but Us sort of slips more into these horror cliches where you have a lot of physical tension, but then when it gets to the thematic conflict, you don't really understand the lore, or the lore feels kind of shoehorned in or kind of weak. So what I really think is missing is some element of the story that would tie together this thematic struggle with this metaphor of the doppelgangers living underground. There would have to be some sort of supernatural or technological mechanism that explains away all these like logistical impossibilities, and also makes it more clear to the audience that this is what the film is really about. It's about the government having manipulated these people into being this lower class, and this lower class finally erupting in this rebellion. And then there's the final twist of the film, which, oh boy, I don't understand why they did that. Like, is it just a shocker? I don't know what it means. So Lupita Nyong'o's character was actually the doppelganger the whole time. She was swapped out as a little kid, which, aside from the fact that I think it's usually not a good idea to retroactively replace your main character and sort of devalue everything they've gone through up to that point, it also raises all these questions that, again, throw me out of the narrative. Like, why did she pretend not to know what was going on the whole time? Now, when you go into a doppelganger movie, of course you expect there to be at least one character that was a doppelganger the whole time. You know, it's the most obvious twist. But this film sets itself up to seem smarter than that. You think, okay, they're not going to use this for like cheap twists. They're going to have some better reason for this to be a doppelganger film, and it's going to come together in some intelligent way. But as it turns out, there's actually no real reason for them to be doppelgangers at all. Like, the film is about class struggle, so you could assume that it was like about they're just like us. This literally lower class of people are just like us. They have the same rights as us. They're just as entitled to a good life as us. Maybe they're even a representation of us as the American people. Funny side note that I noticed while thinking about this is Lupita Nyong'o's character, the tethered version, at some point when she is asked, "Who are you guys?" she says something like, "We are Americans." And I mean, us is US, right? So I guess it's supposed to be that. But then class struggle is all about one group living in privilege while another does not. And those groups are very different in that. And I don't think that doppelgangers really represent that divide very well. Especially because in the film, the lower class people do like make a stand, but the upper class people are who we root for. They're the protagonists, and they win at the end. At least they get out at the end. They win against all these crazy lunatics from downstairs who are portrayed as like not even fully human. Like, granted, the government made them that way, but they're like shown to be these inhale speaking cultist maniacs, which, if they're supposed to represent us and like they're just like us, kind of goes against that. So thematically, I have like no idea what the film is really trying to say to me. At which point I would go and look at the character struggles, like what do they go through, how do they change? But that's just a bunch of like family disagreements and like hitting people with baseball bats. So I'm like, I can't really see an arc in any of the main characters other than like they grew as a family, and they were, I guess, confronted with themselves. But then even that is like me grasping at straws, because they're not really confronted with themselves. They're just confronted with something that looks like them, but they're never made to like reflect on their own behavior, because these doppelgangers are nothing like them. They don't even represent their like dark side. The only counterexample to this is Lupita Nyong'o's character having that moment of violence at the end, sort of turning into a monster. And for a moment I thought this was going to be like a thing of her reflecting on, oh shit, maybe I'm more like them than I thought I was. But then it's revealed that she was the fucking tethered version the whole time, and that thematic approach is out the window! So basically, in terms of theme, this movie is just completely incoherent to me. Please leave me a comment explaining how I'm wrong. I would really like to like this movie.